continues.
And we're joined now by Texas Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke, who serves on the House Veterans Affairs Committee and the House Homeland Security Committee. We're going to be talking about the border and the border crisis in this segment of the Washington Journal. But first, to your Veterans Affairs Committee membership, just want to get your take on this deal to fund the VA to the tune of $17 billion that was announced yesterday.
I think this is a good step. It's not going to completely resolve the issues that we have in the VA, which I think run much deeper, have to do with lack of accountability, a culture that has not placed a premium on the veteran and health outcomes for veterans, but instead on management, administration, bonuses, the kinds of problems that led to the secret wait lists in Phoenix, problems that I saw in my home district in El Paso, where we had veterans who could not get in the standard 14 days or 30 days, but could not get in at all. We're calling in for mental health care appointments, and we're told to call back next year. When they did that, the appointment never showed up on VA. They didn't have to report that they were not able to meet their deadline, but the veteran wasn't able to get in and get help. So I'm glad to see additional money, about $5 billion, to hire more providers, psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners. I'm happy to see nearly $10 billion for care in the community. When you can't get in to see a doctor or a mental health professional in a reasonable amount of time, we're going to allow you to go seek care in the community. If you live in a very rural part of the country, maybe Doña Ana County or far west or far east El Paso County, we're going to allow you to purchase care in the community instead of having to come in to the VA. And I like the fact that the bill includes provisions to get rid of senior management that are standing in the way so that we focus on accountability, on performance, value excellence. I like that we're going to create graduate medical education positions, about 1,500 of them around the country, especially in underserved areas like El Paso, so that we get doctors in to see veterans who need it. But we can throw all the money in the world at this problem if we don't address the culture at the VA, if we don't prioritize accountability, if we don't see consequences for poor performance, for malfeasance, for fraud, for those who've misled Congress, then we really will not have solved the problem. So a good first step, but a lot of work to do on some much deeper systemic issues.
And any roadblocks that you see in the House this week to getting past that first step?
I don't. I've been very pleased in the 19 months that I've been a member of Congress to serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, because it's really one of the last refuges for bipartisanship. Almost every bill that we've worked on in this committee has been passed out unanimously. The chairman, Jeff Miller, the ranking member, Mike Michaud, in the House Veterans Affairs Committee typically work in tandem, and they may have differences, but they resolve them before they bring them to the committee. So the fact that we have the chairman and the ranking member on board and the chairman of the Senate committee on board, I think speaks very well for the ultimate passage of this bill. So I predict that we will be able to pass this, move forward with this good first step, but again, a lot of work to do. No one should think that we've resolved the problems in the VA with this bill, as important a step as it is.
As we said, you also serve on the Homeland Security Committee. We said we'd talk about the crisis on the border, but here's a headline from one of the independent papers down by you. Congressman Beto O'Rourke, there is no border crisis.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting that these children who are escaping violence, severe insecurity and instability in their home countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador have caused such panic here in Washington and in our state capital in Austin. When you look at this problem or issue in context, you look at the eve of 9/11 in the year 2000, we had 1.6 million apprehensions along our southern border. Last year we had about 420,000, just a fraction of what we had 15 years ago. And this year, despite the spike and increase of refugees and asylum seekers from Central America, we probably will not get to 500,000. So this is a very manageable issue. We have laws in place to take care of these kids, to unite them with families, and in some cases to return them to their countries of origin if they don't meet standards for asylum or refugee status. I think we should follow the laws that are in place. We should calmly do what is in the best interests of these refugees who are fleeing very desperate situations. And then I think in a rational, thoughtful way, address some of the underlying issues in those countries in Central America that have created the conditions to the point that kids and their families make this very difficult, dangerous, and sometimes deadly decision to travel the length of Mexico to present themselves for asylum at our border. We are the richest, most powerful country in the history of the world. Certainly, 90,000 children is not a crisis. You look at Syria, where you have 3 million refugees pouring into Jordan and Turkey, countries that have a fraction of our wealth and resources. That might constitute a crisis. What we have at the southern border of the United States is not a crisis. It's an issue that this country is well equipped to resolve.
If it's not a crisis, is $3.7 billion too much to be throwing at this problem, or $2.7 billion as the Senate is trying to move this week?
Yes, it is. I like some aspects of what the president has requested in his $3.7 billion proposal, some aspects of what the Senate has responded with in their $2.7 billion proposal, such as increasing the capacity and quality of care for these young children from Central America, making sure that as the law demands, we put them in the least restrictive setting or conditions possible. But what I don't like are measures that respond to this panic about the border, this unfounded concern about security issues at the border. Things like millions of dollars for drones to patrol the southern border, beefing up detention and interdiction at our southern border. I really don't think that's necessary at a time that this country is spending $18 billion a year, more than we've ever spent, more than all federal law enforcement combined, to secure our southern border at a time that we have record low crossings from Mexico, from our southern border, and at a time, and I have to add this, that El Paso, Texas, the community that I represent, one half of the largest binational community in the world, right on the border with Mexico and Ciudad Juarez, El Paso, Texas today is the safest city in America. And it was last year, and it was the year before that, and it was the year before that. San Diego, another large border community, the second or third safest city in America. So we need to reject this idea that there's crisis, that we have a border insecurity issue. We need to rationally and thoughtfully respond to the issues presented to us, and that will not involve drones. It will not involve more border walls. It will not involve sending the National Guard.
And it will not involve, as I understand, in your opinion, the Cornyn-Cuellar Humane Act. This was the compromise, or the bill that was introduced by John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, and Congressman Cuellar of Texas as well. That bill would ensure that all unaccompanied migrant children are treated equally regardless of their country of origin. Immigration judges would hear cases of migrant children within 7 days of initial screenings. Decisions on eligibility to remain in the U.S. would happen within 72 hours. It would authorize the hiring of up to 40 new immigration judges, require HHS to provide protective shelter during the processing, and a few other measures as well. What's your issue with this measure?
What this measure does is it changes a law that was passed unanimously or near unanimously in 2008, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or the William Wilberforce Reauthorization Act, passed by both chambers, signed into law by President Bush, that ensures that, or seeks to ensure that we do not return children, the very children who are now presenting themselves for help and shelter in our country, that we do not return them to dangerous situations, back into the hands of traffickers, back into violence, potentially back into a deadly situation. And what the Humane, quote-unquote, Act seeks to do is to reduce the standards of care for these children to the level that we set for children from Mexico back in 2008. And advocates for the Humane Act will say, well, when it comes to Mexican children seeking asylum, we have a wonderful story to tell. 95% of them voluntarily return back to Mexico. That's what we want to see with Central America. It's almost as though we could wipe the issue clean by setting this reduced standard. What this reduced standard means functionally for these kids is that within 1 week, they will be forced to, without an attorney, without potentially knowing the language, and certainly without knowing the law, navigate our immigration and asylum system, decide whether they're going to apply for a T visa or a U visa, decide whether they meet the bar for credible fear, and if they're unable to do those things, they face deportation within 7 days. So we would rush these kids back into very deadly situations, back into communities like San Pedro Sula in Honduras, which today is the deadliest city in the world, bar none. I think we are a much better country than that. We have a long, very proud history of accepting refugees, and certainly in this case, these are refugees in our own hemisphere who literally have come to our front door, knocked on it, said, I'm fleeing for my life, I need your help, and what are we to do? We certainly should not send them back into harm's way. I think we have the capacity, the resources to take care of these kids and give them due process, allow them to petition for asylum. In many cases, they will succeed. In some cases, they won't, and they will be sent back to their countries of origin.
Congressman O'Rourke is here to answer your questions, take your comments for about the next half hour or so here on the Washington Journal. Democrats can call at 202-585-3880. Republicans, 202-585-3881. Independents, 202-585-3882. And if you're outside the U.S., it's 202-585-3883. We'll start in Texas. John is calling in from Hemphill on our line for Independence. John, good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you doing this morning?
Good, John. Go ahead. You're on with Congressman O'Rourke.
Yeah, first of all, as a Vietnam vet, I'd like to thank the congressman for accepting the responsibility to represent veterans in Congress. What I'd like to say, I've been in the VA system for 42 years, and I've seen it when it was really bad. It has gotten better. But I see our young brothers and sisters coming up from the last two wars. I see the backlog at the VA in Shreveport and at Houston VA hospital. And it seems like the problem always is, once you get to see the specialty doctors, when you have issues like in my case, I'm a cancer survivor and stuff, we cannot go to the specialty clinics and make our appointment for our 6-month checkup or annual checkup. We have to go through a primary care provider, which in most cases is not even a doctor, they're nurse practitioners or physician assistants. We have to get an appointment with them. Then they have to decide, like I've been told so many times in the last 5 years, well, let me think about it. I'll put in a referral the next week. A month goes by, you got to follow up. And it's sad that veterans that have served this country honorably, especially in the combat zones, have to still fight a war within the VA with people that have an attitude that they don't care. The staff in the VA hospitals have gotten so worse over the years. The receptionists at the clinics, at the primary care clinics, and so on, they spend more time on their cell phones, jaw-jacking with each other, and when a veteran waits an hour for an appointment, an hour and a half, when you go up there, they make you feel like you're a nuisance to them.
Well, Congressman O'Rourke, let you respond.
John, first of all, thank you for your service to our country, and it's nice to hear a voice from Texas up here in Washington, D.C. What you're talking about is the issue that I think is going to be the most difficult to resolve and won't be solved with additional resources. We can't pour money at an issue of culture, an issue that doesn't prize accountability, and an issue that doesn't place a premium on excellence. If we do not resolve these cultural issues that John is talking about, if we don't have accountability at the VA, if there are not consequences for taking care of the veterans who come in and quickly connecting them with a provider, whether that be a specialty care physician, whether that be a mental health provider, whether that be a doctor or a nurse practitioner, or whether that be care in the community, then what have we done? I like in this conference report, this bill that we're about to vote on, this agreement between the two chairmen of the Veterans Committees in both chambers, that there are some measures for accountability, that it will make it easier for the Secretary to get rid of top management that stand in the way, that don't help us develop that culture that we're looking for. But, you know, to add to what John said, in El Paso, it is not uncommon for me to hear from veterans who cannot get an appointment at all, as I mentioned earlier, who call in and are told to call back next year, or who wait months for an appointment and then on the day of their appointment are called and told that that appointment has been rescheduled for another 3 months forward, or are able to finally get that appointment, show up, and are told that they didn't bring the appropriate paperwork, that they didn't have the stress test that was necessary for them to continue their care. Those are the kinds of things that we need to resolve. Those will not be solved by money. That's a tough job for our incoming VA secretary. We wish him the best of luck, but we're also going to hold him accountable for getting it done.
Let's go to Keith, waiting in Chicago, Illinois, on our line for Democrats. Keith, good morning.
Yes, hi, Representative.
Good morning.
You are 100% correct. It is not a crisis. I was so happy to hear George Will say on Fox that, Emma Lazarus poem, so right, we can absorb these people and should. They are children. And it's immoral. The things that I'm hearing from some districts in the United States, because it's the same thing that the Irish and the Italians and the Greeks and the Jews went through at the turn of last century. The exact same things are being said. And again, the United States does not lead the world in taking immigrants or refugees. I believe countries like South Africa and even Pakistan outpace us in terms of taking refugee populations. And much of the developing world as well. Even Iran takes a great deal of refugees and immigrants. And we have to stop the lie that we're where everyone want to be. Americans, my age and older, I'm mid-50s, are looking to retire in Latin America. Many of us are turning to Mexico, Uruguay, Panama, and we have to get off of this thing that we are so exceptional that everyone wants to be here.
Yeah, Keith, you made some really good points. We do actually have a great tradition of accepting immigrants, accepting refugees, accepting those who are asking and need our asylum. And you can go back to the Europeans, the Irish after the potato blight in the 19th century. You can fast forward to more recent times and look at Russia, look at Myanmar, look at Vietnam, look at Iraq. All of those countries sent hundreds of thousands of refugees to this country. We incorporated them. They became part of our country, and in many cases were wildly successful. I had a chance to be with former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who herself was a refugee to this country and who later became Secretary of State and has an incredibly distinguished career in this country. We can obviously name many immigrants and refugees who've done very well in this country. So I think there's really a positive side to this story, and that is that this country really is in many ways founded on migrants and refugees and asylum seekers, and it is part of what has made us so strong and so successful. And as Keith said, when you look at this in context with the rest of the world, I mentioned 3 million Syrian refugees going into Jordan and Turkey in a very tough part of the world. Certainly the world's most powerful, wealthiest country has the resources and ability to accept these refugees from Central America. And in conclusion, let me say this. In El Paso, Texas, while these asylum seekers have come through the Rio Grande Valley, further down the Rio Grande from us, they've exceeded capacity there. And so they are being flown to El Paso, Texas, where they are taken from Border Patrol custody, transferred to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And then ICE notifies the local Catholic charity, Annunciation House, about these plane loads of Central American families coming in. And they prepare shelters so that these folks can get showers, they can get medical attention, they can get a hot meal, and they can get some of the help that they're needing. And it hasn't overwhelmed our community. It hasn't made us any less safe. In fact, I think it's one of the proudest moments that our community has had. And that's my message to the rest of this country, especially those people who do not live near the border, who do not understand this issue firsthand. There's really nothing to be afraid of. And there's everything in the world, in this country, that we have to be proud of and to honor by taking care of these people who are coming in. So, Keith, appreciate the question and the comments. Thanks.
Congressman Beto O'Rourke represents the 16th District of Texas that includes El Paso in his first term here in Congress. Here to answer your questions and comments. Bill's up next in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on our line for Republicans. Bill, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hi. Yeah, I would like to talk to the congressman about. I'm very glad that you guys have come together and all for the veterans and all in the VA hospitals. I just had one suggestion for that. I'm about to enter the system and all, and I do have a primary care physician. And I would rather see the new hospitals or clinics being built, because civilian hospitals are falling apart as it is today or closing down. Allow us to either continue with my primary care physician, a civilian, and let them interface with the Veterans Administration and all. And that would take care of a lot of the situations where there are no doctors. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that veterans are also unemployed, and they have lost their unemployment benefits and all. And pretty much the argument on both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate of the Democrats is that we didn't pay for it before. That doesn't change the fact that there's people out there who can't pay their bills, that can't buy food. So you need to stop talking about it. Just because it wasn't done before doesn't mean it can't be done today.
Yeah, Bill brings up a number of really good points. Thanks for the call. Thank you for your service. And you're addressing another issue. You know, if we're to use a medical analogy for the Veterans Healthcare Administration, you know, we've essentially hopefully stopped the bleeding with this measure, but we haven't addressed the underlying issues, and we also haven't taken this opportunity to think about how we might do a better job of delivering healthcare. And there have been several potential models offered. You know, you touched upon one, which is capitalizing on care that's already available within the community, capacity that exists at either private hospitals, public hospitals, clinics, healthcare providers, behavioral health centers. There's a lot of additional capacity out there at a time when the VA is having a very difficult time getting veterans in a timely fashion to access the care that they need. Another idea that's been raised that I think is worth exploring, may or may not be a good one ultimately, is to think about VA healthcare as a center of excellence for war-related injuries. So post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injuries, prosthetics, musculoskeletal injuries. You go, in this idea or concept, you go to the VA to have those issues treated, and those become centers of excellence. There's no wait time. You get world-class care and attention. And then for all other non-combat or service-related injuries, you're referred back out into the community. Now, critics have said that that breaks down the continuity of care, that you sometimes can't separate issues that would be community-based under this model versus VA-based. But I think when you have, more than 20 million veterans in this country, more than 9 million within the VHA system, one of the largest healthcare systems anywhere in the world, I think it behooves us to use this crisis to rethink the model, decide if there's a more efficient, effective way to deliver better outcomes for the veterans that we're charged with treating. So, Bill, thanks for the call, thanks for the suggestions, and I think that's worth looking at.
Douglasville, Georgia is next. Diane is on our line for Independence. Diane, good morning. Diane, you with us? All right, we'll move on to Bill in Palm Beach Gardens, Georgia. Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, on our line for Independence. Bill, good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Representative?
Good morning, Bill. I'm doing well, thank you.
Good, good. I just wanted to give a call. First of all, I'm an ex-veteran myself, and kudos to West Palm Beach VA and Dr. King, if he's out there listening. But outside of that, I just wanted to mention a couple things. First off, regarding the immigration situation, I would just kind of say this about it. I think both the Democratic Party and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce are kind of reading this thing in a little different light than I think it really is taking place out in the public. I think what people are so upset about, and I think there really is a huge, huge amount of people in America that are very upset, and mainly the way this is being handled on the border. Now, I agree with you. There are things that we can do, and children obviously have to be taken a look at. And I would say you might want to break down that number of actual children. I mean, the really young kids, not the kids that are 15, 14, 16, and 17 that are coming out. Those are kind of young men. but the actual unaccompanied children, and take care of that. Maybe we break your law down to where it really addresses that main function. But the rest of the situation is this. Really, what it really comes down to, in my mind, is the rule of law and the way that it's been handled. The immigration laws have not been adhered to for decades. And I think that's where people really have trouble with the whole immigration problem. And, you know, even to threaten, and maybe this is the question I'll leave you with, if the president is to use executive action on this and go around Congress, that is really what I think upsets Americans the most. And I would like to know how you feel if he was to go and use executive order without going through Congress in the appropriate way.
Yeah, Bill, great question. You know, I'll be honest with you, I'm conflicted on this one. You know, I like where the president is trying to get to when it comes to immigration, but I don't know that I'm comfortable with the method or the means. And I'm really concerned on a number of levels, and not just with this president, but many presidents before him as well, about the growing power of the executive branch. And the more you work around Congress, the less pressure there is on our institution to get the job done. I don't know that there's a substitute for having the people's representatives come to some kind of common ground and make the necessary changes to our laws or write new ones to address the issues that we see today. And so I can sympathize with the president in terms of his frustration. I'm frustrated too. I've only been here for a little over a year and a half, and it's incredible how little work gets done on the most significant issues that face us. But I think it's a very dangerous precedent to start stepping around Congress to address fundamental issues here. And you then have the functional problem of the succeeding president might overrule the executive actions of this one. And so then what will you have really accomplished? But Bill, you also bring up a great point about the consequences of our inability to enforce laws or change laws to reflect reality in terms of labor demand or our values or family unification. And I think we've got to acknowledge some things that Republicans have been saying, like the fact that many of these kids, while they may be fleeing violence, are also connecting with families up here. And so that's part of the draw. I acknowledge that. But I think that's a consequence of having a focus on interdiction and deportation and border security to the point that the usual migration patterns of Central American men or men and women coming up here to work and then returning to their hometowns and villages has been disrupted. And now they're locked here because they don't want to risk the return journey. And so as their children face unprecedented violence and in some cases threats of death or see death around them, it's only natural that they're going to flee towards where their parents are. And so I think we need an immigration policy, ideally one crafted and agreed to by both chambers of Congress, that addresses issues of family reunification, that addresses the fact that we do have a number of people here who are undocumented and should have some earned path to citizenship or at least residency so that they can work here, so that they can come out of the shadows, and so that they can be with their families. Those are values that I think most Americans can understand. And just last point on this, I know a previous caller brought up the issue of refugees. Certainly a lot of kids coming here. We predict somewhere around 90,000 before the end of this year. But asylum applications to other countries that are not the United States near Central America, so countries like Mexico, Belize, Nicaragua, Panama, Costa Rica, are up over 700% over the last 5 years. So it's clear to me that these kids want to be anywhere that is not their home country today. Some want to come here because it's the United States, because they have family here, but really, ultimately and fundamentally, they want to be anywhere that is safer than where they are right now.
On the issue of housing these undocumented minors that come across, Wild and Wonderful offers a suggestion on Twitter. He says, I reject the notion that we have to build facilities to house these children pending their hearings. We own many unused sites. Could they be used to house these children?
Yeah, you know, I think short-term housing is important. As you probably know, within the current law, within 72 hours, these children are supposed to be transferred from the custody of Customs and Border Protection to the custody of Health and Human Services. And then Health and Human Services is mandated by law to have them in the least restrictive setting possible, which is interpreted to mean that when we can, we unite them with family, immediate family, their parents, more distant family, aunts and uncles or cousins, all of whom are vetted and undergo a background check before the children are released to them. But in that interim, while we're locating family, while we're performing that background check, we need to have safe, sanitary, humane conditions for those kids and also for the men and women who are attending to those children from HHS or before that when they're in CBP custody. So I don't know that we need the full amount for detention that the President or even the Senate is requesting, and I agree with the comment that there are existing facilities that we can use in the short term. And let's also remember this. Last month, we saw an average daily apprehension rate of about 355 minors from Central America. This month, the last numbers I saw, it's down to about 150. So the numbers are decreasing. Most people expect them to continue to decrease for the remainder of this year. So the issue of housing these children, I don't know if it's going to be as urgent a month, 2 months, or 3 months from now as it was last month.
Charles is in Charlotte, North Carolina, on our line for Republicans. Charles, good morning.
Morning. I just had a comment and a question. The comment is the reason, and I think if you talk to the ICE and the Border Patrol people, the reason that El Paso is so safe is because billions and billions of drug money and drugs go across the border, and the cartels know that the more trouble that they make in El Paso, the more attention that the American government will have to stop the drug trade. But the drugs coming across the Texas border and Arizona wind up in small towns and cities across the country, ruining lives. And I think that to turn a blind eye that because El Paso is safe, that it's not a pathway for drugs and drug money is sort of naive. The question I've got is we have millions of people in America living here. We don't know who they are, what their health condition is. We don't know if they pay taxes. We don't know if they're driving the wrong way on the interstate, killing people. We don't know. We have people, we don't know who they are, but they keep coming, and now we have these children. Now we're trillions of dollars in debt. We don't have any money. We're having to borrow money from China to operate our government. So the question I've got for the congressman is, would you be in favor of doing a means test of people who are receiving assistance, Americans receiving assistance, EBT, SNAP, et cetera, housing, Section 8, et cetera, and removing one person off the rolls of those assistance programs for Americans for every El Salvadoran children or child or Mexican child that comes across the border? If we're doing that, if we're saying we're paying for it by removing people that are maybe driving nice cars, have cable, have multiple cars, receiving all these benefits, if you want to take an American off to give it to the child, I think I would be in favor. Would you be in favor of that?
Charles, thanks for the question. No, I would not be in favor of that, but appreciate you proposing a solution and asking a question. Let me address 2 points that you brought up, and that is the safety of El Paso, Texas, the country's safest large city, cities over 500,000 people. And your other point about the relative insecurity of the rest of the United States, given the fact that, as you said, there are so many people here, some estimates are 11 million, who are here in undocumented status. And as you put it, we don't know as much as you'd like to know about them in terms of diseases, their ability to drive on the freeway, a number of other concerns that you raised. And I think the 2 points actually come together very nicely in El Paso, Texas. I certainly think that El Paso is the safest city for a number of reasons, including the amazing men and women of the Border Patrol, of Customs and Border Protection. We've got a great sheriff's department, wonderful police force there. But we've also been the Ellis Island for Latin America for over 100 years. And today we have one of the largest migrant populations of any U.S. city. So your fears on the second point about these migrants causing crime or disease or problems in our communities can be met by just looking at El Paso, Texas. We're the safest community, not in spite of all those migrants, I tell people, but I think in some ways because of that. I mean, these are people who've come to our country to get ahead, to make a better life for themselves and for their kids, and they're focused on that. And I think that's done a lot to improve the character and quality of life in our community. We don't have wild public health issues. We don't have issues with violent crime. What we do have is a community that's focused on moving forward, getting ahead, and doing better for the next generation. And I think that speaks to generally what we can expect from immigrants in this country, as we have seen for decades upon decades. I mean, people, had they had a C-SPAN program in the late 19th century, would be calling in about these crazy Irish coming over here, speaking their different version of English, not knowing our customs and ways, bringing over diseases and things that we're concerned about. But we were able to assimilate the Irish pretty successfully, as we have with every group of migrants from every country that's ever come to the United States. Again, it's the foundation of our success. It is what has helped to make us the most powerful, the wealthiest country the world has ever known. And I think that's a wonderful tradition to continue. And we've got a great opportunity here with these refugees seeking asylum from Central America.
Several callers waiting to talk to you. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Bob is in Baldwinville, Massachusetts, on our line for Independence. Bob, good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys today?
Good, Bob.
Great.
That's good. My question is, Mr. O'Rourke, absolutely no disrespect, but our border is far from secure. When you have over 90,000 people walking through and being allowed into the country, it's not secure. To say that it's secure is kind of insane. I don't agree with that, and I'd just like to know your point on how you can say that it's secure.
Yeah. So Bob, thanks for the question. I think you may be conflating two different issues, and one is security, and the other is this issue of these asylum seekers from Central America. I think it's important for us to remember that very few, if any, of these kids have tried to sneak into this country. In fact, they seek out the men in green. That's the men and women in green, the members of our Border Patrol, or the men and women in blue, the CBP officers at our ports of entry. They don't run from them, they run to them. So we could completely wall the border. We could fill the sky with drones. We could put machine gun nests, every 100 yards. And these kids are still going to come, and they're still going to ask for our assistance and our help. And so that, to me, is not a security issue. If we had, large volume of apprehensions at our southern border, as we did 15 years ago, you might then have a point. But if we look at apprehensions in 2000, I mentioned this earlier, it was 1.6 million apprehensions along our southern border. Since then, we've doubled the size of the Border Patrol from 10,000 to 20,000. We've more than doubled the budget for securing that southern border to $18 billion a year. And we are seeing historic, record low northbound crossing attempts at the same time that under this president, we've seen record high southbound deportations totaling 2 million. So we do not have a border security problem. And don't just talk to me from El Paso, talk to the mayors of Brownsville, talk to the county commissioners in Cameron and Hidalgo, the county judge in El Paso County, talk to the folks in San Diego. The border is as secure as it has ever been. And Bob, let me make this final point on the issue. The border can be seen as a threat, which I understand a lot of people in this country see it as, but I tend to see it as an opportunity. One out of every 4 jobs in El Paso is connected to trade and commerce that flow through our ports of entry that connect the United States with Mexico. In El Paso alone, we have about $90 billion a year. It's almost 20% of all U.S.-Mexico trade. You look at Texas, about 400,000 jobs depend on that connection. And you look at the United States, 6 million jobs depend on our connection to our second largest trading partner with Mexico. So if we continue to militarize, fortify, lock down the border, we also lock down job creation, economic opportunity, and growth, not just for my community, not just for Texas, but every state in the union.
A couple callers from your home state of Texas. Philip is in Fort Worth, is on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Philip.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. We've got these people coming in here, and they take our kids' jobs. They don't just take the jobs we don't want. They take the jobs that we do want for our kids. They don't pay much money, but I want to know, what are y'all going to do about in the schools, when you put all these non-English speaking kids in there, now our teachers that don't know Spanish are having to get translators for them, and you're taking away from our kids, education, because now they're having to spend so much time on them, and I don't understand why, we can't just go down to wherever they're running from and clean up their town for them down there.
Philip, so you're bringing up a really important challenge for this country, and that is how you assimilate and educate children from other parts of the world. I'll note that it's not a new challenge for us. I mean, we've been doing this for as long as we have been a country. I mentioned earlier the hundreds of thousands of refugees that we've accepted from Vietnam, from Myanmar, from Russia, the former Soviet Union, and dozens of other countries from around the world. And by and large, we've done it very successfully. In El Paso, we've got some amazing dual language programs. The school that my children attend, Mesita Elementary Public School in El Paso, their classes are taught in English and Spanish. And I think those kids who come out of those programs are, I would argue, more competitive than children who only learn one language. So let's look at it as a challenge, one that can be met. Let's look at it as an opportunity, one that strengthens our country, strengthens our schools, and is part of the price of being America. We are a country in many ways founded on immigration, on accepting and assimilating populations and peoples from other parts of the world, and that has made us incredibly strong. You look at the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the people who have created wealth and opportunity, art and culture in this country, and so many of them are first or second generation immigrants who've successfully assimilated, come through our public school system, and done very well for themselves and for our country.
Over to Oakwood, Texas. Hanson is waiting on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Hanson Matthews, Representative O'Rourke, and I'm a veteran. I spent 12 years, 4 months, and 24 days in the United States Air Force. And I'm also a Vietnam veteran. I was in Korea, Okinawa, etc. I have 2 sons that has been in the military and the Navy. And my question is concerning is claims and benefits. When I was discharged in 1974. I entered the Air Force the 10th of May, 1962. And I was discharged out of Wilford Hall Hospital at Lackland Air Force Base. I was discharged from a mental institution. And Congressman O'Rourke, I must tell you, I have served my country honorably, and I am having trouble receiving my benefits. And I would like to know, out of this $17 billion, my claim, I entered my claim the 17th of September 2010. They paid me a severance pay of $17,500, and they turned right around, and they made me repay that severance pay, and they took my disability for 14 and a half years.
Congressman O'Rourke, any thoughts on the caller situation?
First, Mr. Matthews, thank you for your service. Appreciate the question. You've hit upon this larger issue that we've been talking about this morning, which is we can spend more money on the VA, we can add resources, but if we don't place a premium on performance, excellence, and accountability, then we will have allowed this crisis that we're currently in to go to waste. And you see that on the Veterans Benefits Administration side of the house at the VA as well. In Waco, Texas, where claims for El Paso veterans are processed, we were seeing last year wait times on a first-time service-connected disability claim of 470 days on average. That means some veterans were waiting much longer, perhaps veterans like Mr. Matthews. So we have focused on that. I went out to Waco, which is about an 8-hour drive from El Paso, Texas. We're a big state. And met with the administrator, the director there, talked to the VBA director, undersecretary here in Washington, D.C., and we're starting to see some results from that. 470 is dropping down much closer to the VA standard that was set of 125 days, although we're not still there yet. And we still have far too many people like Mr. Matthews who will call my district office in El Paso and tell us that they've been waiting months, in some cases years, in some cases over a decade to resolve a claim. Now, as the VA prioritizes these first-time claims and tries to meet one of these goals that they've set for themselves, a very ambitious goal of 125 days for a response on a first-time claim, they've also increased the pile of appeals, because as these claims are denied or perhaps not adjudicated properly, it then forces many veterans to appeal these claims. That appeals pile has grown, and there aren't the necessary resources to meet that. So, Mr. Matthews, I think you've given me a great question to ask the VA, which is, what, if any, additional resources do we need to speed up first-time or appellate service-connected disability claims? And where are we going to get the accountability on that side of the house? So I appreciate your question, something also that we need to be focused on at the Veteran Affairs Committee.
We'll try to get in one or two more calls in our last minute or two here. Pam is in Mount Perry, Ohio, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Pam.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I'd like to say that we would not have these problems, you know, like the VA and the health care, and also the legal immigrants, if the president would have done his job at the start. I think it would have been a lot better if the president had started his job. And I'll say one thing about the VA. It has to be redone because of Obamacare. That's going to be where most of the money will be going. And what about the children? These children that come across the border, they belong to someone else. They are not United States citizens.
Congressman O'Rourke, in our last minute or so.
Yeah, Pam, you know, on the VA issue, I think there's plenty of blame to go around. Certainly, this administration deserves some of it, but so does Congress. This issue of these secret wait lists that were kept at regional VA facilities, and the fudging of the numbers and inconsistency in how wait times were reported to headquarters here in D.C. and to Congress and to the administration. We've known about that since 2005. The GAO and the Inspector General within the VA have been making these reports on almost an annual basis since then. So this, for anyone who's been paying attention, cannot come as a complete shock. And certainly for those of us listening to our veterans that we represent in our home districts, we were hearing stories about not being able to get in despite what the VA was telling us. And lastly, Pam, when it comes to these kids, I'd argue that we do have the responsibility, both under law and by our conscience, to do the right thing by these kids. And without going into the details, the U.S. has some culpability in creating the conditions in Honduras, in Guatemala, in El Salvador, that have forced these families to make these very difficult decisions. And yes, the ultimate responsibility resides in those countries, in those communities, within their leadership. But we have not played a completely positive role there over the last few years or decades before that. So appreciate your point and your question.
Congressman O'Rourke is a Democrat from Texas. Appreciate you joining us this morning. Come back and chat with us again.
Will do. Thanks.
Up next.